I'm Josh Ryan, licensed professional counselor, and this is Pause and Respond, the framework for emotional control, disciplined thinking, and better decisions under pressure. Have you ever finished everything on your list only to feel more anxious as opposed to being more peaceful? It's a strange experience. You finally have permission to stop. Nothing urgent is waiting, no deadline, no emergency. No one is asking anything from you. And somehow, rest becomes the hardest thing you've done all day. Have you ever noticed that? Maybe you finally sit down on the couch. You pick up a book, turn on a movie, step outside with a cup of coffee. And within minutes, your mind quietly begins creating another list. Maybe I should probably answer that email. I could clean out the garage. I really ought to get ahead on tomorrow. The body has stopped moving, but the mind hasn't. And the hardest part of rest isn't stopping your body. It's quieting your identity that believes it always has to be useful. I'll sit with that for a minute, because I don't think most people are exhausted from working too hard. I think many are exhausted from never believing they've earned the right to stop. Now, we've spent the last several episodes talking about identity, protecting it, questioning it, measuring it, trusting it. Now we arrive at another question. Who are you when there's nothing left to accomplish? Now, that question may feel surprisingly uncomfortable for some people, not because they don't enjoy peace, but because peace quietly removes the thing they've been using to define themselves. Children don't usually grow up learning how to rest. They grow up learning how to become useful. Helpful children get noticed. Responsible children get praised. Productive children often receive admiration. No one intentionally teaches this. Most parents never mean to. But many children quietly reach a conclusion anyway. And that conclusion may be when I contribute, when I achieve, when I'm useful, I matter. Now, those aren't conscious thoughts. They're emotional conclusions. Repeated often enough, they slowly become identity. Eventually, doing stops being something you do. It quietly becomes proof of who you are. And that's why stillness can feel so unsettling. Because when the doing stops, you're left alone with a question productivity has been answering for years. And that question is, who am I today if I didn't accomplish anything? Now, I've had clients tell me they finally took the vacation they've always dreamed about. The flights were booked, the hotel was wonderful, schedule was completely opened, and by the second day on the trip, they were restless. Not because they weren't enjoying themselves, but because they couldn't stop thinking about everything they should be doing. Now, that's not laziness. That's identity withdrawal. When productivity has been your primary source of reassurance, rest can feel like something has been taken away. Now, one of the saddest things I've seen in counseling isn't burnout. It's watching deeply capable people become afraid of empty space. And it's not because they dislike peace. It's because peace eventually asks questions that busyness can postpone. Questions like, how am I really doing? What am I actually feeling right now on this phase of my life? What grief have I been too busy to notice? What am I afraid I'll discover if I finally become still? Now, stillness doesn't create those questions. It simply removes the noise that was covering them. Now, I don't think people struggle at rest because they're lazy. I think they struggle because rest has become relational. People who have experienced emotional safety often know how to rest. People who have spent years proving their value often don't. Because rest isn't always about sleep. Sometimes it's about permission. Permission to exist without producing. Permission to be loved without performing. simply permission to matter before accomplishing another thing. Here's something I hope you'll carry with you throughout this episode. You were born valuable. Productivity was never supposed to convince you of that. Think about that again. You were born valuable. Productivity was never supposed to convince you of that. Now, if that's true, then maybe the goal isn't becoming productive enough to finally deserve rest. Maybe the goal is discovering you were worth the rest before you ever earned it. Imagine what it would feel like to finish the day without needing to justify it, to sit quietly without apologizing for it, to enjoy an afternoon without mentally preparing tomorrow's work, to experience stillness without feeling guilty. Well, that's not laziness. That's freedom, real freedom. This episode isn't really about rest. It's about permission. Permission to stop proving, to stop producing for a little while. Permission to discover that your identity survives even when your productivity pauses. Because somewhere inside that discovery is one of the deepest freedoms we've explored all season. And that brings us to the question we'll spend the rest of today's episode answering. When did rest stop feeling like a gift and start feeling like something you had to earn? Because I have a feeling that somewhere inside that question, many of us are finally going to meet ourselves. Have you ever had an entire day to yourself and somehow ended it feeling guilty? Nothing went wrong. You weren't avoiding responsibility. You simply just slowed down. You rested. Maybe you spent time with some family or read a book, took a nap, sat in the house that you pay so much for. And yet, when your head finally hit the pillow that night, a quiet thought drifted through your mind. I didn't really get anything done today. As though the day somehow counted less because you weren't productive. Why? I don't think that's a question about work. I think it's a question about permission. Somewhere along the way, many of us stopped asking, what do I need? And quietly began asking, have I done enough to deserve rest? And that's a very different way to live. Most of us would never say those words out loud. But listen to how often they show up in our lives. Saying things like, I'll relax after I finish this project. I'll take a break next week. I'll enjoy myself once I get caught up. Except there's always another project, another responsibility, another reason to postpone peace. Eventually, rest stops becoming a part of life and starts becoming a reward you never quite believed you earned. Children aren't born believing they have to earn this right to rest. They don't arrive in the world thinking, I'll play after I've proven my worth. But many of us quickly learn something different as we grow. We learn that rest comes after usefulness, after achievement or responsibility. Again, no one has ever said those words to us. But children, they're constantly watching. They're paying attention to what gets celebrated, what gets noticed, what gets rewarded. And many quietly reach a conclusion that when they produce, when they help, when they achieve, then they're allowed to breathe. And that lesson follows us deeper into adulthood. Eventually, achievement stops becoming something you celebrate. It becomes something you require before you allowing yourself to rest. Think about how heavy that is. Every day begins with something to prove. Every evening ends with a verdict. Did I do enough? It's no wonder why so many people are exhausted. They're not just carrying responsibilities. They're carrying the burden of believing that peace needs to be earned. I've had clients tell me, I don't even know what I enjoy anymore. Not because life became empty, but because productivity quietly occupied every space where joy used to live. Every hobby became a side hustle. Every talent became something to monetize. Every free afternoon became an opportunity to catch up. And without realizing it, they stopped asking, "What brings me alive?" and started asking, "What can I accomplish?" And those are not the same question. One of the ideas we talk about in Pause and Respond is recognizing the hidden rules that quietly shape our lives. So here's one I think many of us have been living without ever questioning it, and that's earned rest. The belief that rest is something you receive only after you've done enough, only after you've proven enough, only after you've become enough. But what if that rule was never true? What if rest wasn't something you earned, but something you needed, not just to recover from life, but to actually experience it? I think that's why so many people struggle with stillness. Stillness isn't asking you to stop working. It's asking you to stop proving. And those are two very different things. Work can be meaningful. Work can be joyful. I enjoy very much what I do. Work can even be deeply fulfilling. And for those that have found it, they just keep coming back for it. But the moment your work becomes responsible for convincing you that you matter, it begins carrying a weight it was never designed to hold. Maybe work was never supposed to answer the question, "Who am I?" Maybe it was simply supposed to express who you already knew yourself to be. Now here's another thought I'd invite you to sit with. Some people know how to work incredibly hard. Very few know how to receive. To receive kindness without feeling indebted. To receive help without feeling weak. To receive love without feeling like they have to pay it back. And yes, to receive rest without feeling guilty. Because receiving requires something performance can never earn, and that's trust. Imagine waking up tomorrow without feeling you had to earn the day ahead of you. Imagine believing before you answered a single email, before you solved a single problem, before you checked a single box, that you were already enough. Not because you've stopped growing and not because you've lowered your standards, but because your worth has finally stopped depending on your performance. And that's freedom. Not freedom from work, but freedom from proving. Here's a sentence I hope that stays with you after this. You don't become worthy after rest. You rest because you already are. I'm going to say that again. You don't become worthy after you rest. You rest because you already are. Because the goal isn't working hard enough to finally deserve peace. The goal is discovering that peace was meant to be the place from which you worked from, not the prize waiting for you at the finish line. So if rest isn't something we earn, and work was never meant to define our worth, how do emotionally healthy people hold ambition without becoming enslaved by it? How do they pursue excellence without quietly believing excellence is what makes them valuable? Because I think the answer has less to do with working less and everything to do with learning a completely different way to live. Now, what if nothing about your schedule changed tomorrow, but everything about the way you carried it did? Sit and think about that for a moment. Because freedom doesn't always come from doing less. Sometimes it comes from carrying less pressure, less proving, less of the quiet belief that today has to justify your existence. Now, if you've been listening to this episode and thinking this sounds like me, I want you to hear this carefully. This isn't an invitation to become less ambitious. It isn't permission to lower your standards. It isn't about caring less. Healthy ambition isn't trying to become someone valuable. It's simply giving expression to someone who already knows they are. And that's a completely different way to live. Imagine two people walking into the same office tomorrow morning. They work the same hours, lead the same meetings, answer the same emails, finish the same projects. From the outside, their days look almost identical, but inside, they're living two completely different stories. One spends the day quietly trying to prove that they're enough. The other spends the day expressing gifts they've already accepted. Same work, different identity, different peace. Now, for many of us, life has quietly become a journey toward enough. Maybe one more promotion, one more degree, one more successful year, one more compliment, one more milestone or achievement. But let me ask you something. How much stress would finally feel like enough? How much recognition? How much money? How many accomplishments are enough? If enough keeps moving farther away every time you get closer, maybe the problem was never the finish line. Maybe it was the question you were asking. I'd like to offer you a different word: enoughness. Not as confidence, not as perfection, not as pretending you've arrived, but as a settled identity. The quiet confidence that your value isn't waiting somewhere out there in the future. It's already here. Enoughness isn't something you achieve. It's something you remember long before anyone admired what you could do. You mattered before the career, before the titles, before the accomplishments, before someone thanked you, before anyone applauded any of your successes. You already had value. And that's not something adulthood gives you. It's something adulthood often makes us forget. When you begin living from enough, everything starts to change. Not because your circumstances suddenly became easier, but because your identity finally becomes steadier. You still pursue excellence, you still work hard, you still serve others, but you're no longer asking those things to tell you who you are. You're allowing them to express who you've already become, and that's freedom. One of the simplest practices I've begun encouraging clients to use has nothing to do with productivity. At the end of the day, before asking, "What did I accomplish today?" ask a different question. Who experienced me today? Did my children experience someone who was present? Did my spouse experience someone who was listening? Did my coworkers experience someone who brought peace or pressure? Did people meet someone who was proving or someone who was present? And those answers shape a life far more deeply than another completed task ever will. Your calendar records your commitments. It cannot measure your peace. Your resume records your accomplishments. It cannot measure your character. Your bank account records your income. It cannot measure your identity. Some of the most important things about your life are never going to fit inside of a spreadsheet. Now, you might discover something surprising. Rest doesn't make you less alive. It makes you available to notice the life you've been rushing past. The conversation with your child that wasn't interrupted by you checking your phone. The laughter around the dinner table. The quiet of an early morning. The beauty of an ordinary afternoon. And the gratitude that can only be heard when life finally becomes quiet enough to listen. Imagine living one completely ordinary Tuesday without trying to earn the right to be there. Nothing extraordinary happens. You go to work, you answer some emails, you fold laundry, you make dinner, you laugh at your family, you drive home in traffic. The schedule doesn't change, but something inside you does. For the first time, you're no longer trying to prove you deserve your own life. You're simply just living it. And I think that's where freedom feels like. Now, if today's conversation resonated with you, I'd like to invite you to try one simple practice this week. Find 15 minutes. No phone, no email, no television, no checklist. Just 15 quiet minutes where you don't have to accomplish anything. Pay attention to what happens. Notice how quickly your mind wants to become productive again. Notice the thoughts that begin to surface. Notice the urge to earn the moment instead of simply receiving it. Now, don't judge yourself, just be curious, because awareness is always the first step toward freedom. And maybe those 15 minutes won't simply teach you how to rest. They'll remind you of someone you've known all along, the person who was already enough before the world convinced you otherwise. Now, if this episode encouraged you, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who's been carrying the invisible weight of always having to prove themselves. And if you'd like to continue this journey, you can visit pauseandrespond.com. You'll find articles, practical resources, books, workbooks, opportunities for coaching, all tools designed to help you build emotional resilience, healthier relationships, and a life that's guided by intention instead of reaction. Because emotional maturity isn't learning how to accomplish more. It's remembering that your worth was never waiting for you at the end of your productivity. It was present before the day ever began. So until next time, don't ask yourself, have I done enough to deserve rest? Instead, ask, what would today feel like if I believed I was already enough? Because that's where freedom begins. Not at the finish line, but at the starting place. I'm Josh Ryan. This is Pause and Respond. Less reaction, more choice.